syempre, ang ating speaker for today is a graduate from University of the Philippines in Diliman. She's a good painter. She's an artist, a really good artist. And today she'll talk about the biocultural insights from Ikik, the local bird hunting practice of the Kankana-ey of Sagada Mountain Province. So without further ado, let's welcome our speaker for today, Ms. Josefa Isabel Tauli.
Good afternoon, everyone. The study that I will be presenting to you today is a study that I did for my institutions and the environment class offered by the School of Environmental Science and Management. So the results of this study are actually also partial results of my master's thesis, and it is a topic that in a field that is close to my heart, that is ethnozoology, which I am interested in because, well, I like animals, and because I myself am an IP, I am an Iboloy Kankana-ey from Baguio City and Busao Mountain Province. So this study is preliminary in that it is still ongoing, but I will be presenting to you the results that I have so far, which is more the anthropological side rather than the biological side of the entire study. So to start with, we know that the Philippines is a country that is very rich in biological diversity. It is considered a mega-diverse country, which means that it is one of the few countries in the world that contain the majority of all the species. Aside from being biologically rich, our country is also culturally rich, with its about 110 indigenous ethno-linguistic groups from Luzon to Mindanao, each with their own traditions, practices, beliefs, and knowledge systems. So, we know that culture is inevitably and inextricably linked to natural environment, and many practices, whether they be for food, for recreation, or for cultural identity, involve interaction with surroundings. And these two components, the ecosystem and the society, interact with each other in a system that we call the social-ecological system. Unfortunately, both biological diversity and cultural diversity in our country are threatened by many factors. So, moving on, in the mountains of Sagada, in Mountain Province, which is located in the Cordilleras, is an indigenous group that we call the Sagada Igorots, or the Northern Kankana-ey. So just a few things about this group is that their kinship system extends to both sides, to close relatives of both sides of the family. They worship nature spirits as well as their ancestors, who they keep in high regards, and they perform rituals during important milestones of the life cycle and the agricultural cycle. So as a form of livelihood, some of them form on man-made terraces that you can see here, or another source of livelihood for them is tourism, because Sagada is a popular tourist spot, and it's known for things like their beautiful limestone caves and their hanging coffins, which you can see here. Now, passing through the mountains of Sagada during the cold months of around September to December, are migratory birds that utilize the East Asian Australasian flyway. So during these times, these birds try to escape the cold and the scarcity of food in Northeast Asia, and they migrate southward towards Southeast Asia and Australia for the winter. So during these months, the people of Sagada, or the Kankana-ey of Sagada, engage in a practice which they call Ikik or Mangkik, which is when they hike up certain mountains at night and catch migratory birds. So at present, there is still very little published information on this practice. This is one of the few that I found. It was published in July 1953 in the Sagada Postboy, which is a school organ of St. Mary's School in Sagada. So it goes, Sagada is not only admired for its natural beauty, but also has abundant forest resources. On the mountain called Ampakaw, which bounds Sagada in the west, is the place where many go to Mangkik, which is catching birds at night with a net. Aside from this, most of the other information that I found was mostly online, in news articles and blog entries, and they mostly describe the practice Ikik as a traditional bird hunt. So other than these few sources, most of the information about the practice remains mostly in the minds and in the stories of the people of Sagada. So with that, the objectives of my study were to obtain basic information on the Ikik practice through a preliminary ethnobiological survey, as well as by collating information from online sources. Aside from that, I also aim to present Ikik as it stands as an institution of the Sagada Kankana-ey culture, and to present the potential implications of this information on possible future wildlife management. So, this information can add to our knowledge on how our country's indigenous peoples perceive, use, and manage their wildlife. Aside from that, we can also learn what traditional ecological knowledge, or TEK, might add to the current scientific data of the bird's identity, behavior, and population trends. We can also look into the possible influence of this practice on bird population decline, and this information or the results can also potentially guide decisions on appropriate actions for wildlife management in the area. So for my materials and methods, I conducted a semi-structured interview, which basically means that I had a questionnaire to guide me with regards to the flow of the interview. But if new ideas would come up, depending on what the interviewee says, I can pursue that idea for example, and get more information. So for this preliminary study, the only criteria for choosing respondents were that they lived in Sagada for a period of time and would know some details on the case. So it was not deemed necessary that they took part in the practice firsthand. So aside from that, I also looked into their possible contribution as key informants to the research, which means that I can contact them later for information such on things like who else to interview, where to go, and who to ask, things like that. So regarding the questionnaire, the details will be seen later in the results, but they were asked regarding various cultural, institutional, biological, and environmental aspects that they might know on Ikik and the migratory birds that arrive. So these were conducted in whatever language that the respondent was comfortable with, which was usually a mix of English, Filipino, and Ilocano. And aside from that, as I mentioned, I also collated online sources who published news articles and blog entries. So, for the results of my study, these are my respondents. And to provide context for the rest of my results, let me first define Ikik. So, all of my respondents defined it in pretty much the same way, and they said that it is the practice of catching birds that arrive in Sagada during the cold months of September to December or January, around that time. And it is done only during cloudy nights, which I will talk about more later, and sometimes continuing until dawn, and it involves hiking up certain mountains in the mountain range surrounding Sagada, putting out a bright kerosene lantern, which they call the Petromax, you can see here, and this lantern, when it's put out, seems to attract the birds. So the birds fly towards the lantern, and they catch the birds using a net which they call the siput. It is a net attached to two very long sticks. I'll show this later. And with regards to the terminology, Ikik is the noun, which pertains to the activity itself, while mangkik is the verb, which means to do. Ikik. So you might be wondering about the etymology. They said that it is very likely that the term came from the sounds that the birds make when they are caught. But this still has to be verified. So how did this practice start? Here's a quote from one of my respondents. It goes, what the people who I asked told me is that once there was this old woman who was late in going to the fields. Now upon going back home, she was holding a torch or a salon, which is a torch made of pine wood, which looks like this. And many birds started gathering around her. So what she did is she went back to her community, told her mga kababayan, and the next day they went and they experienced the same thing. So that's how it started, and after that they started going back and trying to see when the birds would arrive. Now, when it started, it seems to have been made for food, but at present it appears that it's now also a recreational activity for Sagada's youth. This was around the 60s, according to one of my respondents. And the methods also changed from what it is now. And I quote, the olden practice is that they made a bonfire, and if the birds come, they catch them by hand. And so they had a stake that they used to hit the birds. Now, however, they already use as a hood, and that's the net. And instead of a bonfire, although they still do make bonfires, they already use a pet. So, where and how do they do it? As I mentioned, it is done on these mountains, Mount Alpacao and Mount Bato. And usually, they leave at around 5 p.m. and sleep in the area and come back the next morning. They said that on the mountain, many semicircle areas are carved in the ground to mark where to set up the net and the lamp. So, again, when the birds fly towards the lamp, they catch them with the net. And then put the birds in sacks. So, aside from that, some of the birds are also roasted by the bird catchers on the night itself as their food for the night. So, nagbabaan pa raw sila ng kanin, ganyan. And the extra catch for the night is divided among the members of the group to bring home. Now, how many birds did they catch? They said that so many birds arrived that even after filling some sacks with the birds, many and perhaps hundreds are left, although estimate lang yun. But one of my respondents clarified that he doesn't know whether this is still true today. So that information I don't have yet, whether the number of birds have been declining. But they said that many of them, that the arrival and the numbers of the birds might have been affected by climate change. Many of them mentioned that. So, who are the main participants? At present, it is the Sagada youth, specifically the male youth, but anyone who wants to go can go. And it is not exclusive to the residents of Sagada, because visitors from out of town, such as Manila, also go because it is encouraged by some tour guides for me. So it is worth pursuing the idea that tourism might also be the degree of tourism might also affect how the practice is done. So when exactly do they do this? As I mentioned, it's from September to December, but they said that it's only done during cloudy nights when the moon is covered. So the respondents, as well as online sources, gave two very different explanations for this. The first one is that, para wala kang kaagaw sa ilaw. Kasi they will depend on the moon, hindi na sila maghahanap ng ibang ilaw. That's one of the explanations. The other, very different explanation is the birds do not fly, they say. They flow with the wind, they flow with the clouds. So that's why you might say, don't the birds get tired? But no, they just flow with the clouds. So this references like a means by which migratory birds conserve energy during migration. So they might use something that has to do with the clouds to keep in flight for long periods of time. Now, in relation to this, they have a term, kasao, which is when you can expect to catch little to no birds because either the moon is full or wala clouds. So they don't go ikik when it's kasao. And regarding what kinds of birds they catch, this is part of the study that I don't have exactly the data yet. But I'm going to show you some pictures later that they took in a very similar activity that they hold in Dalton Pass in Nueva Ecija. So, But first, the only one that I was able to get from the interviews was that the biggest that they catch is an egret, which they call pupa. These are pictures from Dalton Pass. So this is a cattle egret, a pompadour green pigeon, a slaty breasted rail, an emerald dove, a Philippine cuckoo dove, and an Australasian mark. So it's very probable that they also catch similar species in Sagada. Aside from these, they also got red-bellied pitas, which is a local species, which means that they also catch non-migratory fish. Now this is also a picture from there. It is an egret being caught in the net. So as you can see, some are having more holes, and this is a man waiting for the birds to arrive. So, what is the cultural significance of this practice? As all of my respondents said that it is part of Sagada culture, and it is mainly for food, as you might expect, but it is also for sport and recreation. Sport in the sense that it's exciting to see birds that you don't ever see, so they go there because it's exciting. They get to see birds that are not usually seen in Sagada, and of course, that's still new. Aside from these, they also sell extra birds during Sagada's market days. So others would dress them, remove the feathers like they do with chickens, and sell them. And I quote, they're delicious. Although it's considered a delicacy since not many sold them. And another thing that we do with the birds is that we keep them as pets. But ayan, iba nagiging pet na lang, pero hindi naman tumatagal. Either they die or inuulam na lang. So they don't need to stay as pets. And here's another interesting thing. One exciting thing is that they once caught a bird with a ring on its foot from Hong Kong. And so those in Sagada discovered that there were birds that came from Hong Kong and passed here. So that's why what they did was, with the same bird, they put a similar tag saying something like, this bird passed here on this day, and they let it fly again. So for everyone's information, bird bands are attached to the foot of birds to monitor things like their migration patterns, or their age, or their life history. Now, regarding laws and news involving Ikik, it was actually banned in 2005 and in 2010 due to the bird flu scare. That's the only time I found na ban siya, but it still has to be verified. But in 2005, another article came out that said that the residents were voluntarily going to stop Ikik, not due to the bird flu scare, but due to rising expenses of the things that they use, such as the kerosene that they use for the lamps. So, somewhere here it says that the cost of doing the practice, the sleepless night, and the effort did not really exceed the benefit from catching the birds. Ayan, hindi ka nyo, 150. Kapag hinati na yung 300 pesos that they get from selling them, naging 150 per person na lang. So, hindi na siya worth it, kumbaga, if they still do it. It was also mentioned by one of my respondents that research is probably needed to assess exactly what the effects are of this practice on the birds. And if some species seem to have lessened in number or have disappeared, there might be a need to regulate it. But for now, I am confirming that there are no laws really that regulate it. It remains to be an open practice done during the season. And it was also mentioned that those who practice Ikik do not know which birds are endangered, but with proper education, they might be willing to let them go. So, here's a short discussion. The practice shows a clear relationship between cultural practices and the environment. And regarding its place in the Sagada culture, it has been a part of Sagada culture for decades, perhaps even centuries. I'm not exactly sure yet. But it has become what it is today from continued observation of the birds and their arrival. So from observing the birds, they were able to devise a methodology to effectively catch them. And it has been established enough for different aspects of the practice to have local terms. It is also widely known within the community, even those who do not practice it, or even those parts of Sagada that do not practice it, know about it. And aside from that, it also persists even in the face of regulation by the local government. So sabi nila, when it was banned due to the bird flu scare, tuloy pa rin sila. And as a practice, it is also threatened by different aspects. As I mentioned, it's threatened by the rising prices of their materials, and as well as the possible lessening of birds because of factors such as overhunting, habitat destruction, and climate change that the migratory birds experience, not just in Sagada, but throughout their migratory journey. So, further research and data gathering is needed to establish reasons behind the birds' apparent attraction to the light. So I don't know yet why this is, and their connection to the clouds that they come with. So kung totoo ba yung they flow with the clouds, or whether it's just to block the moon so that they can only see the light from the lanterns. This still has to be confirmed. And aside from that, I'm still hoping to obtain more information so that I can determine things like the bird species, the population trends of the birds, the biology and their life history, their ecology, and their behavior. So I'm hoping that they know this, and as I said, they have been observing these birds for decades. And aside from that, more data will also help determine whether or not regulation or education is needed to prevent population decline. So this all depends on how many birds they collect and what species exactly, whether they're threatened or not. And when enough data is gathered, the results might be able to contribute to informed conservation and management plans in the future. Off the top of my head lang, one of the things that might be able to be done is training the bird catchers, for example, to attach tags if it's no longer mainly for subsistence, but again, this kind of thing is still very complex to review. And finally, that the Kankana-ey view the practice as part of their culture should be taken into account. So, in conclusion, general information on the relatively poorly documented local bird hunting practice of Sagada termed Ikik was successfully collected, and future work is yet to be done regarding detailed descriptions of the different aspects that I mentioned in my results, as well as definitive identification of the migratory birds that pass through. Aside from that, it is also recommended to myself, or recommendation to myself, that this information be verified in order to prescribe appropriate management and conservation actions if needed for both the practice and the wildlife that it relies on. So to end this talk, I just want to explain again why studies like this are important to wildlife management, because at first they appear very anthropological rather than biological. But in management, there are three aspects that you need to consider: the population you want to manage, its habitat, and the third component is the people. So areas of conservation interest are often found in places with local communities, and if your management actions are not appropriate for the socio-ecological situation, then it will be very hard to enforce or to obtain participation from the local community for your management plans. Aside from that, since we lack manpower in obtaining information about our wildlife, often, in many cases, this information already exists. We just have to ask them. And finally, if we are able to successfully incorporate both the ecosystem and the society or the people, we can hit two birds with one stone in conserving both our biological diversity and our cultural diversity, both of which are threatened in our country. So that's it. Thank you.